Well, Rachel, you know how it is when we get two doctors, especially two OB-GYNs chatting. We just can't stop. We
I
have,
love it. And then you got into you both had some training in Philadelphia and you knew the same people.
yeah,
We just had an amazing conversation with Dr. Kerry Krauss, who's a practicing OB-GYN. She opened her own practice. She is the medical advisor to Natural Cycles, which is the first FDA-cleared tracker for contraception. And she does so much more. And she's a bundle of energy and information.
it was wonderful to talk to Dr. Krauss and learn about her practice, but also about her interest in digital platforms in general. And for those watching on YouTube, I find it so adorable and very appropriate that she had a big vulva statue sitting behind her. So that really resonated with me. Let's talk to Dr. Krauss. Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun-Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so excited to have our guest today, Dr. Kerry Krauss, who wears many, many hats, as so many of our guests do. She's a practicing OB-GYN. She's a medical advisor to Natural Cycles, as well as a number of other digital women's health companies, and is really using her expertise in women's health to not only treat patients, but to also build businesses. So you're exactly the kind of person we created this show to speak with. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here. Big fan of the podcast and both of you.
Great.
Back at you. You know, when you became a physician and you and Alyssa had some overlap in some of the places that you trained, you thought you would be treating patients, like probably your whole career. Well, tell us a little bit about your training and when you started getting the bug to expand your clinical skills into the business realm.
Yeah, so I really got into medicine. I always said if I wasn't a doctor, I would have been a teacher. I think I always really loved the educational part of medicine and sort of having patients understand what's going on in their bodies to then be able to make changes in their health that was meaningful. And I think again, if you really understand what's going on, at least, the more you can understand it, the more you can intervene, or the more you're motivated to intervene to make changes that impact your health. And as I was going through my medical training and residency, obviously, and then my first job ultimately, I was full scope OB-GYN, as many of us are when we first graduate. Getting my feet under me, and obviously, overwhelmed by, not only the amount of sort of patients that I would see in a day, also just sort of the call schedule, and also like noticing that patients were getting increasingly medically complex, while their literacy was not increasing to the same degree. And a couple of years out, it got me thinking about, as we're seeing a lot of these wellness apps come out, and things like Aura and Apple are doing more in the way of menstrual tracking. It got me thinking about how we can use digital tools to improve patient sort of understanding of medical conditions and their buy-in as in terms of making their health better. Not only that, but also improving communication with clinicians, because so much of our visit, and again, we have shorter and shorter visit times with each patient, right? And shorter times to sort of get a history and then do whatever educating we need to do. And so thinking about like, how can we make things better? And, I was seeing so many clinicians like me sort of leave medicine, and I didn't want to do that. I still loved the job. It was just the system wasn't working for what the job, in my opinion, needed to be able to give good care. And to me, digital health seemed like the natural solution to a lot of those problems. Of course, AI hadn't even like entered the scene at that point, but that's a whole other conversation, which has opened up a lot more doors. But it sort of got me thinking about digital health, and I was approached by Natural Cycles to be an advisor as I started engaging in more conversations on LinkedIn and learning more. And it was really the opportunity of a lifetime. I feel like it was meant to be in a lot of ways. And I've learned a ton over my 2.5 years there, and have really like, I mean, I knew the potential when I joined, and I said, wow, there's first of all, I had never heard of Natural Cycles, which is interesting as it's an FDA cleared
Well, let's
Yeah,
start there. Let's
contraceptive.
yeah, so
But
much going
yeah,
on. Let's just kind of define digital health because, for some people, digital health means they go online and get a supplement, or
yeah,
they go online and read a newsletter.
right.
But, this is a much more detailed digital health in terms of data collection and people
Yeah,
learning about their cycles. I was an early adopter of Natural Cycles in my practice. Of course, it's the first app that monitors cycles that's FDA cleared, and I definitely want to ask you about that. But
yeah.
how are you finding what drew you to the digital platform? Was it just that people could collect their data so it would make your life easier as a clinician? Or I'd like to say, did you go
Yeah.
to the dark side for other reasons? And I love it on that side as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
fill us in on that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, to me, one of the things that I saw pervading a lot of these wellness apps was, again, it's the tracking of the period. And I think, a lot of what we ask as clinicians is when was your last period? What were your last 3 cycles like? And, when someone's coming in with issues, we're asking, okay, well, if you're having heavy bleeding, how often are you bleeding? How long have you been bleeding this heavily? And it was always a very inefficient process. And you're dealing with recall bias. And I think that was sort of one of my aha moments is, well, of course, if we have a longitudinal way to collect this data and engage the patient on a regular basis, we can not only track menstrual symptoms, and now we can actually track ovulation, which is, I think,
Mhm.
in a way, like the period and ovulation are a vital sign of our body, right? We've never really been able to measure it easily. Now
Yeah.
we can,
No,
which is,
we
yeah,
consider it a vital sign,
right.
and a window into somebody's health for sure.
Absolutely.
So I know it is certainly used at every stage of life. I know it well, I should say every stage of reproductive life for
Yeah.
women. It
Yeah.
started out with menstruation as a way not only to help people get pregnant and understand their fertile time, but also to prevent pregnancy if it wasn't the right time for them. And now it looks like you've really ventured into perimenopause and menopause and other issues where the cycle can give information, PCOS, or now called PMOS as
Yeah.
well. So tell us about how you moved on in natural cycles to all of these other reproductive stages.
Yeah, so I think it was a natural extension of what we were doing. So I'll tell you a little bit about sort of the history and the impetus for the development of Natural Cycles because I think it's a really cool story. It's so the CEOs of Natural Cycles are a husband and wife couple, Dr. Alina Berglund. They're both PhD physicists, and Raoul Scherwitzel met when they were both, of course, working on the Higgs boson particle discovery, which was a Nobel Prize winning discovery at CERN in Switzerland. And while they were doing that, they, met, got married, and Alina had been on hormonal birth control before, had had some side effects, and wasn't sure that she wanted to go back on it, although she knew she was finishing her PhD. She didn't want to get pregnant right away. She had just gotten married. And so, like a lot of us, she's thinking, well, I maybe don't want to use hormones because I didn't have great side effects. How can I naturally prevent pregnancy? I know that there's, because she had sort of researched this in the way that she does, to know that there's an increase in temperature when you ovulate. So can I use what I know about digital algorithms? And again, that's part of what she did is in CERN was she, had large data sets and would devise algorithms to filter out extraneous data and know what's the good data to listen to. She basically applied that knowledge to her menstrual cycle. And this was sort of before the advent of wearables. Back in the day, we used
Yeah.
a thermometer. And, actually, we're now just starting to phase out the thermometer because there's just so many wearables. And we actually launched our own wearable that monitors temperatures. But that was really the start. So she designed Natural Cycles to be a contraceptive because that's initially
Yeah.
how she wanted to use it. It it just followed from there that, of course, well, if you're accurately predicting ovulation with this algorithm, because again, that's what you need to do to prevent pregnancy. It's not enough to know when ovulation has occurred. You need to be able to predict when it's going to occur, even in the case of some cycle regularity. So once they had developed a very accurate algorithm to be able to predict ovulation, they naturally said, well, then people who want to get pregnant can just use it to get pregnant. And so they created a version of the app that allows you to plan pregnancy. And, really that was the goal of the company, I
Got it.
think, from the early days was to be a comprehensive women's reproductive health support tool. So we not only have the plan and prevent modes, we have a follow pregnancy mode. Postpartum came out, I think, about a year and a half
Mhm.
ago. And then understanding perimenopause. I mean, I think that was always sort of the next
Yeah.
progression. It happened to coincide with a massive sort of uptick in menopause interest, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that it's really applying the science of the menstrual cycle and being able to predict ovulation and periods to whatever phase of life. I know,
So
yeah,
it really begs the question, how is this so different than just the old-fashioned rhythm method?
right.
Number one. And number two begs the question, how do you really monitor or understand perimenopause when ovulation is so irregular or even absent for many months at a time?
Yeah. So, as far as, the predicting ovulation, because it is an algorithm as opposed to just assuming that cycles are every 28 days or that the cycles are always regular, right? Because I think as we learned in residency, when you have the old-fashioned rhythm method, first of all, you often had to track cycles for a while to see what your average cycle length was. And then the predictions were based upon that defined cycle length that was your cycle length, right? And then you would calculate, the days that you were predicted to be fertile. But again, it always assumed that regular cycle length. The algorithm works very, very differently. And again, this algorithm's been evolving since I think it was created 2014, 2013. We got FDA clearance in 2018 for the algorithm, and it was cleared in a de novo pathway. So I can go into more about what that means, but for sake of time, I'll leave that. But basically, once the algorithm was cleared, it was also cleared to deal with irregular cycles.
Okay.
And it was tested with irregular cycles. So by, basically by factoring in that degree of uncertainty based on past cycles. So for instance, if you had anywhere from, let's say, like 20 to 40-day cycles, the algorithm takes that into account, whereas the old rhythm method would not,
Okay.
and would give you a larger fertile window. So again, women with irregular cycles will have larger fertile windows on natural cycles. They can also add in LH tests, which can help to more refine the algorithm and give them more green days because it gives the algorithm more data. But again, it's meant to be also like a very sort of not totally hands off, but like especially with the wearables, you're not taking your temperature at the
Right.
certain time without getting up or drinking a glass of water. You're really just wearing your ring and you're opening your app, and that's it. Or you're wearing your band and opening your app.
So
Um,
there's so much in there. I want to
yeah,
back up for a second. You're
yeah,
the first FDA cleared. You talked about de novo. We've talked about that
yeah.
before with other guests. Describe what that means and what the clearance means. What it means natural cycles is able to accomplish vis-a-vis other contraceptive options, because I think that's what's one of the most unique things
Yeah.
Absolutely.
about the company and about the brand.
Yeah, so the de novo clearance basically, and again, feel free to jump in here, but basically the clearance is not the same as approved, right? So approved is sort of a higher level, and it's specifically with safety data.
Yeah.
It's a higher risk class as well. So that's one of the things to understand is there's risk class for devices. So typically devices that are implanted are a higher risk class. So like for instance, your IUDs, your Nexplanons, those are actually implanted in the body. So the risk or safety profile it needs to be proven, and that's why you get sort of like a more rigorous approval process. the Natural Cycles app is a lower risk class because again, it's not going in the body. There's no device implanted. It's non-invasive, so the risk class is 2 as opposed to 3, and of a lot 3 is a lot of the other drugs and devices that are out there. So that's why we are FDA cleared. The efficacy data or effectiveness data that we had to supply is still the same. And we had to supply, I think at this point, we've had hundreds of thousands of patients in our efficacy data. And that because we are FDA cleared, we get audited on an annual basis by the FDA to ensure that our effectiveness rates are the same as what our original clearance
Reported.
stated. And in
And your
fact,
original
yeah,
clearance, just so people
yeah,
understand de novo, de
yeah,
novo
sorry,
means that this is a new approach. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's the
correct,
first contraception. It
right,
means that this particular model is not close enough to anything
right,
else that exists, and you
yeah,
needed to demonstrate efficacy individually. So just
right,
compared for folks who are listening, a new condom has a predicate device, meaning there's many other devices that work the same way. And so if this is made potentially from a different material or it's infused with some other ingredient, that's still considered, it can be compared to a predicate device, an existing
right.
device. So de novo, even though it's a lower risk factor in this case, what it's saying is that Natural Cycles has done something that no other contraceptive has
Right.
done in this way.
Correct. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so yeah, there is no predicate device or comparable predicate for Natural Cycles. It is a de novo clearance. There's also the 510K clearance, which is where there is
Mhm.
a predicate device, which is the vast majority of, I think, FDA clearances are the 510K.
And so for
Um,
people to understand that, that's a tampon, that's a
yeah.
toothbrush,
Yeah,
that's
like it's
even a lubricant.
grandfathered in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly.
And so as long as you can like prove that you're similar to those devices, you're accepted or you're cleared.
So here's today's hot flash. Did you know that the effectiveness of contraception varies based on method? IUD, more than 99% effective. The pill, 93% effective. Condoms, only 87% effective. The Natural Cycles FDA app is 93% effective, and this was published in Contraceptive Technology in 2023. I have a curious question, and this is a little detailed, but I noticed that this is effective for women 18 and older.
Yeah.
Yet the standard time for people to get their period is from 9 to 16, and then outside those parameters being abnormal.
Yeah.
Why was 18 chosen, or was it just arbitrary?
It was actually due to our patient population that the efficacy trials were done on because of consent issues for
Okay,
minors. We had to go for 18 and over just because it was sort of too,
yeah,
cumbersome to get parental, clear. So
sure.
that was sort of the decision that was made by the founders at the time. But I do think that that's in our future for sure. And I think,
Okay.
puberty mode is something that we would love to, explore as well. I have a 13-year-old daughter and she's like chomping at the bit to use Natural Cycles. And,
I bet. I
yeah, she's
bet.
like our
I had
number one fan.
another thought is because Rachel knows I bring this up all the time because of course I would like us OB-GYNs to remain in business with something to do.
Yep.
How is the doctor kept in the loop with Natural Cycles? And are doctors or healthcare providers being inundated with sheets and sheets of data from people's Natural Cycles accounts in an effort to understand what their patients are going through?
Yeah. That's a great, great question. And I think it's something that like all of these wearable devices are really working on right now is how do we actually make the clinician's life easier with this data? Because so many devices live outside of they live in like the sort of the wellness sphere. And I know Aura is doing a lot of work to sort of, interface with healthcare providers. And, I think that's also work we're trying to do. Because again, we absolutely want this data to be clinically useful because it is. It just has to be presented in a way that clinicians feel is helpful to their workflow and not a hindrance. And
Yeah.
I think we've done work on our HCP reports to really show, like, we have a mode where it basically overlaps symptoms that patients have tracked with the phases of the menstrual cycle. So for instance, like, to diagnose menstrual migraines, if you're seeing those migraines occurring at certain times of the menstrual cycle, like, when you're getting about to get your period, that can signify menstrual migraines. If you have, pain at certain times of the cycle, I think there's a lot of applications there. I think we still have a ways to go to making that, like, not only just flagging it to the user, but really, excuse me, integrating with the clinical workflows and the EHRs. And I think that's the phase we're starting to
Yeah.
see now. So yeah,
Great.
I think that's in process, but we still have a ways to go.
So you've mentioned a couple times, you mentioned Aura, you've mentioned the band. What we're seeing so often now is so many of the wearables companies are trying really to be a partner in the health journey, not just providing information, but giving you personalized insights so that you can make different decisions. Do you have partnerships? I know you have your own band. How important is that to your business, and when did you launch that?
Yeah, so I think there's another key thing that I know is near and dear to your heart, Rachel, and your work, but the other piece is accessibility, right? Because a lot of these platforms are cash pay, and Natural Cycles has been cash pay really up until the last year or so. It still is available cash pay, but what we've really been trying to do at Natural Cycles, and again, our advantage by going through the FDA clearance
Yeah.
pathway, is now we can access insurance reimbursement. And to me as a clinician, I'm sure you'd agree, Alyssa,
Yeah.
if your patients can't access the tool, it's not going to be a part of your regular workflow. And so, if for instance, a wearable costs $500, and I have some patients that, like, they don't even want to pay out of pocket for Motrin, like, that's not going to be a tool you can use with everybody. But if you have something that is going through the insurance pathway, and again, like, we are now doing a massive outreach to doctors. We're developing partnerships with telemedicine companies. We're developing APIs or integrations with medical records so that we can really fit seamlessly into the healthcare system. And the insurance, I think, is the linchpin in that. And we are now covered by most commercial insurances. We're working on the government insurances. They're always a little slower to adopt, but I think that's really where, you just can see much broader uptake and accessibility when you have the insurance coverage.
And this is a huge, huge topic in women's
Yeah,
health. The first question that any investor asks a founder is who's going to pay for this?
right,
So the reimbursement path, we always hear from investors that they're concerned about regulatory risk, which is the process that you use to get de novo clearance. But
right.
the other bigger, so I think sometimes bigger area is, what is the reimbursement pathway? Is
Yeah,
there a way that people can pay for this? We have plenty of great solutions for people who can pay out of pocket. But
exactly.
when we're talking truly about accessibility, the insurance piece becomes critically important. And just to level set, 45 to 50% of pregnancies are Medicaid pregnancies, meaning that
Yep.
that's the insurance that women have. So that's, one out of every two pregnancies are someone who is basically supported by the government. It's not a judgment, it's a reality. So you need to understand that if you're not offering solutions that fit a broad population, you're not going to make very much progress in solving big problems. Before we let you go, I have a question about the competitive landscape. Clearly, the FDA
Advantage.
clearance is a competitive advantage,
Yeah.
and the insurance reimbursement that goes along with that is a competitive advantage. For people who are trying to understand whether Natural Cycles is right for them versus some of the other ones. And I'm not asking you to do an advertisement for the other trackers, but what should they know in terms of key differences when they're making decisions and decide whether they want to be a customer of yours or one of the other? And there are quite a number of other ones. You
Yeah.
know that better than we do, but
Yep.
it's not an
Yeah.
empty, it's not your Natural Cycles is just the only one running down this highway.
Definitely not. And I've learned so much about the competitive landscape. Not only I'm a huge user of wellness tools myself. Like, I always love to demo the latest wearable, and I use Aura and I use Apple, and I even compare them. And so, like, I'm always looking at, how one stacks up next to the other. And I really think what defines natural cycles in terms of, it is really unique in a lot of ways. First of all, it's one of the only ones that really focuses on women's health. I think a lot of these other brands, they're doing lots of different things. They're, focusing on, a lot of sort of more like holistic, like cardiovascular health and sleep and sort of all these other, like they have lots of different functionality, and that's great. I think natural cycle's linchpin is the menstrual cycle, and that carried out in whatever mode and phase that you are in your reproductive or even now post-reproductive life, because you can actually use natural cycles in perimenopause mode even if you're post perimenopause. But so I think that's one of the differentiating factors. Also, the fact that like we have been very science based, and that's like a foundational principle for our company, is that everything we do is evidence based. We just published our 30th clinical peer reviewed publication,
Wow.
which is
Congratulations.
a really cool milestone for us. And I think that's actually one of the things that drew me to natural cycles in the beginning. I said, wow, they've really done the work and they've gone through the appropriate regulatory pathways to validate their tool. And I think that validation is something that we don't always see in the rest of the sort of tracker and wellness space. So yeah, I'd say it's really the focus on women's health and the science and validation that's gone into the tool.
Fantastic. I think that there's probably so much more to come with natural cycles. Where can people learn more about you? Because you also are in private practice and
Yeah.
started your own practice.
Yeah.
So let us know where people can find more information.
Definitely. So the web address for Natural Cycles is www.naturalcycles.com. And then specifically for HCPs, we have a /HCP. That's where you'll get a lot of the information on insurance reimbursement. Also, I do webinars and educational sessions. Again, I love to talk. You can tell that, especially about natural cycles. So happy to, we do presentations virtually on demand. And we can also do free samples. So for clinicians, we have a sampling program. They can try natural cycles for themselves. I think that's a really great way to get to learn the tool. And for me personally, so my practice is Krauss Gynecology. I really formed it as a way to incorporate digital health into practice. And my website is kraussgynecology.com. So that's an easy one to remember as well. And you can also always email me. It's kerry.krauss@naturalcycles.com. I love to hear from people. I think that's been one of the coolest parts of this new role that I have, is I've met so many really amazing people along the way. And I always love to hop on a quick call and meet someone new. So please feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on Business of the V, and we will be watching.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for all the work that you do, and have a great day.
You too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.